Asian markets are fluctuating as traders brace for what could be the Federal Reserve's next move, in an economy already reeling from President Trump's devastating tariff war. While global investors wait for Wednesday's expected interest rate cut, the real story is how Trump's reckless trade policies have created the very economic instability the Fed is now scrambling to address. Markets across Hong Kong, Singapore, and Jakarta rose cautiously in early trading, but the underlying tension is palpable. Seoul hit another record after South Korean officials scrapped plans to lower capital gains taxes for stock investors, but even that victory couldn't mask the broader anxiety gripping Asian economies. The irony is staggering as Trump himself now threatens to impose major sanctions on Russia, but only if European partners halt their purchase of Russian oil and join in coordinated action.
Post on Truth Social, Donald Trump addressed all the NATO countries and the world and said that he has said that Washington was prepared to move forward with major sanctions on Russia, but only if European partners halted the purchase of Russian oil and joined in a coordinated action. Remember, he has always been speaking about the fact that Russian oil only has been, kind of sponsoring and funding war against Ukraine. Akanksha is now joining us on the phone line. Akanksha, each day, Donald Trump makes it very clear, you buy Russian oil, you're going to have to pay the price.
Absolutely, and this is now doubling down as far as the pressure on Russia is concerned. Because remember, Pallavi, he's been urging all of G7 nations particularly to put a stop to any kind of purchase of Russian oil. And Donald Trump clearly in this Truth Social post is losing patience. He's already made it clear that he will do major sanctions on Russia, but only when all NATO countries are on board with the same sanctions and when they cease oil purchases from Russia. So he's gone on to say that I'm ready to go when you are, just when is the question. So he's clearly losing out on patience. And most of the NATO members, including Turkey.
He's demanding unity from allies after spending years alienating them with unilateral tariff threats. Through his Truth Social posts, Trump warns that Russian oil has been funding the war against Ukraine, showing growing impatience with NATO members, including Turkey and various EU nations who continue purchasing Russian energy. Yet this is the same president who has systematically undermined international cooperation with his America First policies. Trump promised his tariff war would make America great again, yet here we are, with the Federal Reserve forced to cut rates just to keep the economy from collapsing under the weight of his trade policies. The central bank is expected to lower borrowing costs by 25 basis points Wednesday, though some observers predict it could go as high as 50 points. What's particularly revealing is Trump's recent call for NATO allies to impose tariffs on China. This admission reveals a fundamental weakness in his approach.
Which was clearly, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and India getting together to thumb their nose at Trump. So I think what is interesting, it's an admission on the part of Trump that he needs help to achieve his goal. And I think there is an opening for Canada and allies to say, okay, if you need our help, well, let's work together, but we need to be clear on what exactly we are trying to achieve here. And for instance, we would need a clear confirmation on the part of the U.S. that they would provide security. They would give security guarantees to Ukraine to prevent further invasion from Russia. But we need a lot more details on what exactly would happen, because right now what Trump is asking us to do is do the heavy lifting for him. He has not said himself that he would increase the tariffs that he has already applied to to China, because he knows that, in fact, China would immediately stop exporting rare earths and magnets to the U.S. So it's an interesting opening, but we should try to clarify and come up with a better game plan than what Trump has enunciated so far.
Former Canadian Ambassador St. Jacques views this as an opportunity for allies to negotiate better terms with the U.S., noting that Trump's request reveals his need for allied support after recent diplomatic setbacks. He emphasizes that Canada was among the first to impose tariffs on Chinese EVs but received no recognition from Washington. The ambassador argues that if Trump retaliates against Western allies for not following his lead, it would backfire on the American economy. Trump himself seemed to acknowledge the desperation of the situation on Sunday, saying, "I think you have a big cut. It's perfect for cutting." Perfect for cutting? This from the man who claimed his tariffs would solve all of America's economic problems. What Trump won't admit is that his tariff war has created a perfect storm of economic uncertainty that's now forcing the Fed's hand. The data tells the real story. Asian markets are mixed precisely because investors can't figure out how to price in the chaos Trump has unleashed. Shanghai edged down after data showed further weakness in China's economy, with growth in retail sales and industrial production much slower than forecasts. This isn't coincidence, it's the direct result of Trump's aggressive tariff policies that have disrupted global supply chains and created uncertainty in the world's second-largest economy. The desperation in these threats is palpable.
And so he's also doubled down in terms of his attack against China, where he's saying that he will call for 50 to 100% tariffs on China until the Russia-Ukraine war ends, because he's also been left quite embarrassed after a failed Alaska summit. Many have been questioning what was he able to achieve. So it's basically now him echoing the same sort of appeals that have been coming in from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who's also been asking for sanctions not just against China but also India. But what's surprising over here is rather a pleasant surprise that he's not mentioned India in this entire post, which means that that's also an indication that the United States and India are perhaps very much in the middle or in the thick of the negotiations, and we can expect a positive outcome given that Donald Trump has in fact only referred to Russia and China this time around. But China also has a temporary relief. We'll have to see what comes their way by the end of November.
But also, Akanksha, do you think that the recent SCO summit where you saw Russia...
Trump is now escalating pressure by threatening 50 to 100% tariffs on China until the Russia-Ukraine war ends. Analysts note Trump's embarrassment after a failed Alaska summit and connect this to Ukrainian President Zelensky's similar appeals for sanctions. The fact that India is not mentioned in Trump's posts suggests ongoing positive negotiations between the US and India. But the broader pattern of threatening allies and adversaries alike reveals a foreign policy in disarray. The ripple effects are everywhere. In Australia, ANZ Bank retreated following news it had agreed to pay a record fine of 240 million Australian dollars over widespread misconduct. While this specific case isn't directly related to Trump's policies, it reflects the broader climate of regulatory uncertainty and economic stress that his administration has created globally. Even traditional allies are being caught in the crossfire.
Right, Sharon. So this could be seen as a restart of the relationship. In fact, last time President Trump said good things about Prime Minister Modi, and perhaps Prime Minister Modi very quickly responded to those comments of President Trump. Now, this is again the fourth time direct contact between the two leaders, Sharon, where first President Trump writes on Truth Social, post on Truth Social, and then Prime Minister Modi again responded, saying that I'm confident that our trade negotiations will pave the way. Now President Trump has in fact reposted the same post of Prime Minister Modi on Truth Social. So perhaps it shows his commitment to restart this relationship. Also, Sharon, very important to highlight that since his administration has been blaming India for fueling the war in Russia, but in last 1 month, the kind of proactive role which India has shown, perhaps India has always been very proactive and constructive when it comes to ending war in Ukraine. But what the kind of efforts India has made in last 1 month perhaps could be one of the reasons that this resetting is happening, because Prime Minister Modi spoke to President Putin, then Prime Minister Modi did brief the European leaders as well. Prime Minister Modi is also in touch with President Zelensky, and perhaps
Trump has reposted PM Modi's response on Truth Social, marking their fourth direct contact and signaling a restart of the relationship between the two leaders. Modi responded positively to Trump's earlier comments, expressing confidence that trade negotiations will pave the way forward. This exchange shows Trump's commitment to resetting ties with India, especially after his administration had been critical of India's role in the Russia-Ukraine situation. But the fact that such diplomatic repair work is necessary speaks to the damage Trump's tariff-first approach has already caused. Talks between China and the United States are scheduled to continue in Madrid, covering trade issues with an eye on the November deadline for their tariff pause. Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng and his team will also discuss their dispute over TikTok with the U.S. delegation, led by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. These negotiations come after China launched 2 investigations into the U.S. semiconductor sector on Saturday, a clear retaliation for Trump's escalating trade war. The recent Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit sent a clear message.
China, India, all of them together, and the kind of camaraderie, do you think that could have possibly also unnerved the American president?
It really has, and it has in fact fed into the kind of rhetoric that they have been trying to amp up, that it is India, China, which are in fact funding the war in Ukraine. And when the trio turned up in Tianjin, that in fact was a message to Donald Trump that they will not be bowing down to these sanctions or additional tariffs, because that is the strength of the developing economies which were represented at SCO, even though that's a security meeting. But several Eurasian economies, even the global south, the week that's gone by has also witnessed a virtual summit that was in fact held by Brazil as far as the BRICS summit was concerned. So we've seen that there's been a rallying of these global south economies, and they are good enough to sort of tackle the West, and the West is very much aware that they cannot do without business as far as these developing economies are concerned.
The gathering featuring Russia, China, and India together has unnerved the American president. These developing economies demonstrated they won't bow to sanctions or additional tariffs. The rallying of global south economies, including the BRICS virtual summit, shows how the EU recognizes it cannot do business without these developing economies. Trump's attacks are characterized as coming from frustration and time pressure, not strategic thinking. The timing couldn't be more damaging. Just as the Federal Reserve is trying to provide economic stability through rate cuts, Trump's tariff policies are creating new sources of instability. The president has imposed sweeping tariffs that have pushed the average U.S. tariff rate from 2.5% to an estimated 27%, the highest level in over a century. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. These tariffs represent a massive tax increase on American consumers, with economists estimating they amount to nearly $1,300 per U.S. household in 2025. Trump sold his tariff war as a way to bring jobs back to America and reduce the trade deficit. Instead, he's created an economic nightmare that's forcing the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates just to prevent a recession. The Fed's expected rate cut isn't a sign of economic strength. It's an emergency response to the damage Trump's policies have inflicted. Central bank officials have been clear about their concerns. Fed Chair Jerome Powell has repeatedly emphasized that the bank is taking a wait-and-see approach to Trump's tariff policies because of their uncertain economic impact. Powell has noted that while some businesses have absorbed tariff costs initially, they're likely to begin passing those costs through to consumers. The international response has been swift and damaging. China has retaliated with its own tariffs, creating a spiral of economic warfare that's hurting both economies. U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods have risen to 145% in some cases, while Chinese tariffs on U.S. goods have reached 125%. This isn't the art of the deal, it's economic mutually assured destruction. European allies are also pushing back. The European Union has threatened immediate retaliation against Trump's tariff threats, with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk calling them a totally unnecessary and stupid tariff war. Even traditional allies like Canada and Mexico have found themselves targets of Trump's tariff obsession, facing 25% tariffs that Trump justified as necessary to combat drug trafficking. The Federal Reserve's expected rate cut is essentially an admission that Trump's economic policies have failed. Instead of creating the economic boom he promised, his tariff war has created conditions that require emergency monetary intervention. The central bank is cutting rates not because the economy is strong, but because it's been weakened by the very policies Trump claimed would strengthen it. What makes this even more damaging is the timing. The Fed had been on a path to normalize interest rates after years of emergency measures following the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. Trump's tariff war has derailed that normalization process, forcing the Fed back into crisis mode. The international implications are staggering. Asian markets are fluctuating not because of natural economic cycles, but because of the uncertainty created by one man's obsession with tariffs. Global supply chains that took decades to build are being disrupted by policies that were supposed to help American workers, but are instead creating chaos for businesses worldwide. Trump's defenders will argue that his tariff policies are necessary to protect American industries and reduce dependence on China. But the evidence suggests otherwise. The trade deficit he promised to eliminate has actually grown in many cases, while American consumers are paying higher prices for goods they need every day. The Federal Reserve's expected rate cut is a Band-Aid on a wound that Trump himself created. Central bankers are being forced to use monetary policy to address problems caused by fiscal and trade policy. It's like trying to fix a broken leg with aspirin. It might reduce the pain temporarily, but it doesn't address the underlying injury. The broader economic picture is even more troubling. Trump's tariff war has contributed to inflation concerns that have complicated the Fed's job. While the central bank wants to support economic growth through lower rates, it also has to worry about inflation pressures created by tariffs that act as a tax on imports. This puts the Fed in an impossible position. If it cuts rates too aggressively, it risks fueling inflation driven partly by Trump's tariffs. If it doesn't cut enough, it risks allowing Trump's trade policies to push the economy into recession. Either way, the Fed is being forced to clean up the mess created by Trump's reckless approach to international trade. The human cost of this economic chaos is real. American families are paying higher prices for goods because of tariffs. Workers in industries that depend on global supply chains are facing uncertainty about their jobs. Small businesses that rely on imports are struggling with higher costs and supply disruptions. Meanwhile, Trump continues to claim victory even as the Federal Reserve is forced to cut rates to prevent his policies from causing even more damage. He tweets about winning the trade war while the central bank implements emergency measures to keep the economy afloat. The contrast between Trump's rhetoric and economic reality couldn't be starker. He promised his tariff war would make America great again, but instead it's created conditions that require the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates just to prevent economic disaster. Asian markets are fluctuating because investors around the world are trying to figure out how to navigate the chaos. Trump has created. The expected Fed rate cut is not a sign of economic strength. It's an emergency response to the damage caused by Trump's failed trade policies. As talks continue between the U.S. and China in Madrid, the world watches to see if there's any way to undo the damage Trump's tariff war has inflicted on the global economy. The Federal Reserve's rate cut may provide temporary relief, but it can't fix the fundamental problems created by a president who confused economic warfare with economic leadership. The real tragedy is that this was all preventable. Trump's tariff war was a choice, a bad choice that's now forcing the Federal Reserve to use emergency measures to prevent even worse economic consequences. Asian markets are fluctuating not because of natural economic forces, but because of one man's misguided belief that trade wars are easy to win. They're not easy to win, and the Federal Reserve's expected rate cut is proof that Trump's trade war has already been lost.